One of the things I value most in life is perspective. I like learning about new people, understanding unique ways of thinking, relating to past experiences, and collecting all of this knowledge into a melting pot of ideas I call my worldview. This, naturally, translates into the media that I consume as well. Each of the entries I discussed in my Top 10 Characters video left some sort of an impact on me personally, or appealed to me in a way that I could connect myself to up to that specific point in time. So how then would I react to an anime character whom, from the outset, I knew that I could not relate to? The answer, at least in this particular instance, was that I would admire them in spite of that disconnect. That character was Nitori Shuichi, and that anime was Hourou Musuko. Allow me to preface this video by saying that I have virtually no experience with the nuances of gender identity, nor did I know any trans individuals growing up. The topic of sexual orientation was easy enough for me to comprehend, but the idea that one could feel as though they were born into the wrong body was far less simplistic. When I first heard about Hourou Musuko earlier this year, I thought that maybe the anime could answer some of the burning questions I had kept in the back of my mind for several years. In that regard, I was mistaken. Hourou Musuko doesn't provide any answers, at least not explicitly, because gender identity is not a plot point in this anime. Nitori and her friends don't seek to challenge society or what people believe, they just want to be who they want to be. Their plight is not an external conflict, but an internal one that they must each grapple with individually. I've seen some disappointment over this intention, and I feel as though the people who think this way may have missed the point, just as I initially had. Just because a show incorporates a subject doesn't mean that it needs to explain all of the subtle intricacies of that subject. For example, Netsu no Susume uses MMOs as a tool to convey its messages, but the fact that I've never played an MMO didn't stop me from relating to those themes. The same can be said for any premise, whether that be the mundane tennis and baby steps, the fantastical world of My Hero Academia, and everything in between. A good series should not require you to do an extensive amount of research to appreciate it at face value. That's what the characters and the presentation are for. Thankfully, the cast of Hourou Musuko is beyond endearing, and the level of audiovisual talent on display here is nothing short of masterful. Unlike live action, which relies on real people to do the storytelling, animation comes with it an inherent disconnect, and I feel as though that only benefits the nature of this story. These are not real people, but the emotions they experience are incredibly real. I try to keep an open mind towards anything I haven't yet experienced or connected to, but unless I can actually feel what I believe on a deeper level, those opinions will ultimately ring hollow. Hourou Musuko gave me that emotional resonance, and through Nitori's journey, I was able to truly empathize with that pain. I can't actually put myself in her shoes, as the old saying goes, and I don't think that I'll ever be able to fully understand her feelings without grappling with similar emotions myself. But the show allowed me to bridge that gap, not through dialogue or explanation, but through an experience. Empathy through animation. Where other works of fiction may attempt to deliver an idea from a first-person viewpoint, director A. Aoki pulls away from the protagonist with interview clips, fast cuts, wide shots, barriers, and disruptions in the foreground. The show can be downright uncomfortable to watch at times, both in its plot and presentation. As I noted in my Ski Gakire video, I love it when a show effectively uses silence or ambience. This incredible scene in the first episode does just that. The innocent, comforting piano cuts out as the door bursts open, and the tension builds when the room is essentially cut in half by Maho's back. Then we are pulled completely out of the room, where some passing cars can be heard from the street below. Not only has Nitori's privacy, and later her identity, been infringed upon, but she has been completely isolated from the world at large. Back inside the room, the ambience cuts out harshly, once again emphasizing that disconnection. Maho assaults Nitori, and Anna is forced to watch from the hallway in silence as the two scream and struggle. She is a mere bystander with no context or understanding of the situation, and while Nitori and her sister are separated by various barriers throughout this scene, Anna is framed in a similar way. When she first appears behind Maho, not only is she on Maho's side of the window, but Maho herself serves as an additional barrier between Anna and Nitori. When Maho resorts to violence, Anna is removed from the scene entirely, and when Maho gets pushed back, Anna is now somewhat detached from Maho by the partially closed door. When she finally enters the room, she shares the frame with Maho once again. But if you cut the shot horizontally instead of vertically, she is no longer cut off from Nitori by Maho. The bedpost still keeps them apart, but she can finally see Nitori for herself. The only shot that these three share is one in which Nitori runs away, and in doing so, shoves the door open, removing any barriers between Maho and Anna. In other words, Maho saw Nitori as the problem, and now that the problem is gone, these two can be on the same page again. Nitori runs out the door with Maho's harsh words not far behind. The door closes. Cut to black. These seem like small details at first, and maybe I'm reaching with this one. But when Nitori runs into Anna later in the series, it's Maho who tries to keep them apart, to keep Anna from better understanding her brother. An example of this is when Nitori is told that Anna is only available in the evening, but Anna tells Nitori to call whenever she wants. When the two meet again in episode 4, Anna starts picking on Nitori, perhaps taking some influence from Maho's previous actions. Once Nitori starts to cry, however, she stops. And even though Maho says, it's clear that Anna feels guilty about it. This carries over into their next interaction in episode 7, where Anna initially responds to Nitori with a sort of cold detachment. Nitori pushes forward in their conversation, however, and this forces Anna to take a more active role in it. The former expresses concern over a pimple, and then this happens. This moment marks the turning point in their relationship. Anna comforts Nitori, and in doing so, rejects Maho's hostile attitude. With that initial barrier gone, she grows more attached to Nitori, and eventually becomes fascinated by her cross-dressing desires. Their relationship is a short-lived one, however, not because Anna doesn't have feelings for Nitori, but because Anna still views Nitori as a boy, and thus believes that her feelings may be misguided. Any physical barriers between them have long since been removed, but an invisible mental barrier remains. For people like me, Anna is the audience surrogate. She doesn't understand the intricacies of gender identity. She can't relate to Nitori's dysphoria, but by the show's end, she at least accepts Nitori for who she is. She can't see the full picture, but she's willing to make an effort. And someday, maybe she will. Now that I've discussed what the production team can do, let's talk about what they don't do. In the scene that I mentioned earlier, Maho's entrance isn't backed by an ominous or threatening sting to paint her in a bad light, because she isn't an antagonist. No individual in this setting is a traditional antagonist, not even the childhood bully, who is implied to be more complex than his actions would lead you to believe. The only real antagonistic force is not a person, but a series of ideas, conventional notions of gender identity, a history of rigid adherence to these concepts, a widespread human desire to avoid or reject change, and perhaps most importantly, mob mentality. Characters will lash out, characters will manipulate, characters will sever connections. But that's just how they cope with their lack of understanding. Some refuse to learn, while others are simply afraid of what society will think of them by just associating with a transgender person. When a few students lock Nitori out of the classroom, no one lifts a finger to stop them. One girl protests weakly, but not out of sympathy for Nitori. And all of this mockery, all of this negativity, is thrown directly at a kid who was already struggling with a tremendous internal conflict. She had already been driven from her home once before, but to make matters worse, she is then driven from her classroom, and even driven from her friends. Watching Nitori experience what I can only imagine was a living hell on top of a living hell was absolutely heartbreaking. And the early effects of puberty, coupled with the knowledge that Nitori would have to deal with, at minimum, several more years of this alienation, only exacerbated that heartbreak. That Nitori could absorb all of this and continue moving forward is astounding, and it's part of the reason why she stood out to me so much. Of course, she doesn't fight this battle on her own. She does so with the support of her friends. Even someone like Chi-chan, who doesn't have the strongest emotional bond to Nitori, embraces the latter's so-called weirdness without batting an eye. In her case, she can't understand why anyone has a problem with Nitori, and she has no interest in what a bunch of random students think of her. She is a total boss, and I love her. Is it unrealistic that a group of middle schoolers would react in such a mature manner? Perhaps, but given the circumstances, I think it's entirely plausible. Maybe I'm wrong in thinking this, but I'd imagine that kids who deal with more complex issues at a young age would develop a deeper comprehension of topics relative to that issue much quicker. Personally, I was raised by a single mother in relative poverty, and I think that upbringing is a big reason why I never really went through that butting heads with your parents phase that apparently most teens go through. Then again, while realistic elements can be nice to see at times, it's not like I watch anime for the realism. If I wanted that, I could go watch a live-action series. What might be my favorite thing about Hourou Musuko, though, is that it didn't force a message down my throat. I want to be a girl. I want to be a boy. These are not broad-reaching pleas for change, nor are they a condemnation of anyone's beliefs. These are personal desires that are presented neutrally. The events that unfold are tied specifically to these characters in this setting. And while you can certainly form an emotional bias towards all of that, just as I myself have done, the narrative isn't going to drag you to a clear conclusion. It has other topics to explore in the meantime, topics that a broader audience could more easily relate to, like love and puberty. So even though the show might not have given me the potential answers that I had hoped for, it by no means failed to inform my perspective. Hourou Musuko provides context in a way that can't be expressed in words, which is only fitting for a topic that isn't easy to verbalize. It drops me into the lives of these characters, portrays its conflict through superb storyboarding and sound design, and leaves me to draw my own conclusions. As a result, I've gained a newfound respect and admiration for anyone who has ever struggled with gender identity. And that's an achievement the level of which other forms of media rarely achieve. That's why I love fiction. That's why I love anime. That's why I love Hourou Musuko.